All right, so here we go. We're journeying out of Athens to our first really destination where we're going to drive and we're going to get out of the city. And one of the things that was really on our hearts is we really wanted to see the book of Acts come alive because much of the book of Acts is about Paul going into, Asia, but then into Greece and all these cities where the church really was founded there. So one of the things that we wanted to do first was head over to Corinth. And just a side note about Corinth, and this is something that we found because we went out to Corinth and then we drove further to a town called Nafplio. And there's a couple other places Bethany will talk about out there. The town Nafplio was really cool. It was a beach town. It kind of reminded me a little bit of the Caribbean architecture, maybe the same era there, a beach town. But for the most part, it was really kind of off the beaten path. And what we really wanted to see was Corinth and this other Epidaurus.
Theater of Epidaurus.
Theater of Epidaurus. But Corinth specifically, you could do as a day trip from Athens.
Us personally, Nafplio is beautiful if you don't have the availability to go to Tuscany to visit Italy and you're just visiting Greece, but you want to feel like you had a little piece of that Tuscan flavor of Italy. It literally looked like where we stayed in Nafplio because Nafplio is a city along the water, a harbor, a fishing town. But where we stayed, we rented this home, which the family seems to kind of live there when people are not there. So that was a little interesting, but it was a beautiful home and the view was stunning. You could see all the way down to Nafplio, the town, but it literally, I told Wayne, I said, it looks like I'm in Tuscany right now and we're in Greece. It was just stunning. And you start to see farmland and olive trees. And so you just really see a lot of what's in the Bible come to life, where you're like, I can really see why Paul would be living in Greece so much and traveling all around. So it was the first taste that we had of understanding what his travels were really like, except that they were not by car like we experienced. So it was beautiful, but overall, just to condense, we would say if you were really wanting to get a different flavor of Greece, Nafplio, that whole area, we would probably skip it to spend more time in one of our favorite parts, which we'll talk about later, which was the Volos Pelion area, and visit some of the islands around there. But we didn't have time for some of that, which we'll talk about later, because we did choose to venture south, which we're grateful we did, because it was beautiful. And we also wanted to really get in the full aspect of the country of Greece and not just one, region of it.
And one thing about that area, I think for, from a cost and making your dollar stretch really far, is that it's very inexpensive to stay. So there's a lot of places out there where you can start in Athens and you could go out there and you could explore around there and you could have a really great trip. So specifically though, Corinth was amazing because, it's really about Acts chapter 18, and Paul goes there first, but then he obviously writes the letters back to the city of Corinth. So it just gives you that perspective. And then there is a really cool Acropolis above the city of Corinth that we went up to, and I call it a castle structure that was above there, because a lot of these Greek cities, they had these Acropolis up on these high hills so they could see people coming in by sea, very strategic positions. So that was something fun to just really bring the book of Acts to life there in Corinth.
Yeah. And as you travel around, you'll also see what looks like what Wayne's talking about, these castles or fortified cities. And a lot of those happen later in the 18th century. Some of them earlier, like 14th century, you can learn about that. But we were really excited to see what has been there since before Christ and around that early time in BC. So Corinth was really great, and it was also Ancient Corinth. We were walking through the ruins of Ancient Corinth, and you can actually see they have certain places where it's marked where Paul was preaching or stating his case about a couple things that came up. And it was just really wonderful to be like, wow, I mean, this is big, but not big, And so it's amazing to have a scale of what was really taking place and how if you get a few people lit up, the word can travel out, which is always such a great reminder that it doesn't take a lot to do a lot of work. It takes a few, and a few can go out and those few get more few and more few and more few, and there's a power of multiplication through being lit up on fire. So that was cool. My one last takeaway was we had a highlight of snakes. Which, you know, all throughout history, you kind of hear about this and the Bible talks about it, but you don't really think about it if you're in an area where there's not really snakes around. And I was about to jump off this one area and check out this other broken architecture in ancient Corinth, you know, to check out things and wander around. And I heard this little rattle, and there was something inside of me that made me pause. I was like, wait a second. And I looked down, and the fact that I could see it out of all of the, you know, dry grass, brush was just amazing. Like my eyes were highlighted right to the spot. And I literally saw this huge snake, probably like 4 or 5 feet long, just quickly go, psh, and I was like, oh my gosh, that was right where I was gonna jump down. And so it made me look up, just because we need to be aware of, you know, having our senses to things that we're not used to. So that's very important with kids. So I was like, okay, kids, really need to stay on the path, and we have to listen, because we have to be aware, not afraid, but be aware, you know, because they don't want to harm us, but if we're going into their territory and they're afraid, they're going to attack. And so I looked it up. They don't have rattlesnakes in Greece. It sounded like a rattle to me, but what I found out is that it's actually the vibration of the keratin in their tail, which is good that you can hear it, but you can't hear the babies because they don't have keratin. It grows year after year. So that was a very good highlight for us and something to pass on to other families, to really maybe look up what is in the environment ahead of time, which we didn't do, so you can be aware and have a safe travel, but also not be fearful. So that kept us alert for other parts of our journey through Greece.